Hey, amazing viewers! Before we go into this riveting narrative, drop your location in the comments below. We love connecting with you all around the world. Also, if this is your first time here, press the subscribe button and join our incredible journey. Let's hit 10,000 subscribers this month together. Your support means everything. The perfect life we thought we had. The early morning sunlight filtered through the curtains, casting a soft glow across the spacious, elegantly furnished living room. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the air, blending with the faint scent of lavender from the scented candle burning on the kitchen counter. Melissa Parker stood at the ironing board, meticulously pressing her daughter Katie's school uniform. Her hands moved with practiced ease, smoothing out the fabric, ensuring it was crisp and perfect, just the way Katie liked it. The rhythmic sound of the iron gliding over the cloth was familiar and comforting, a simple act of love that had become a part of her daily routine. From the living room sofa, Katie sat cross-legged, her dark brown curls bouncing slightly as she adjusted the plastic stethoscope hanging around her neck. She was examining her stuffed animals, pressing the tiny toy stethoscope against their chests, nodding seriously as though diagnosing some serious illness. "When I grow up, I'm going to be a doctor," Katie declared, her eyes filled with certainty. "A really good one. The best." Melissa turned, her heart swelling with pride. "I know you will, sweetheart," she said warmly. "You'll help so many people." Katie grinned, completely convinced of her future. "And when you get old, Mom, I'll take care of you too. I'll make sure you're healthy forever." Melissa chuckled, though a deep sadness flickered inside her. If only it were that simple. If only her daughter could promise her own health too. Katie had always been a bright and compassionate child. At just 10 years old, she was already deeply empathetic, always looking out for others. She never forgot her classmates' birthdays, making each of them handmade cards with little heartfelt notes inside. She had an energy about her, a light that seemed to shine even when her body failed her. And that was the part that haunted Melissa the most. Katie had been sick on and off for years. It started subtly when she was 6, occasional fatigue, stomach pains that seemed to come and go. Then the fainting spells started. Fevers that wouldn't break. Nights spent in emergency rooms, waiting for doctors to tell them something. Anything that made sense. But nothing ever did. Doctors called it stress. Some suggested an autoimmune disorder. Others believed it was dietary related. But test after test led to nothing definitive. No one could explain why a perfectly healthy little girl would collapse in the middle of playing or why she would wake up screaming in pain. Melissa had put her own career on hold to be there for Katie. She had once been an accomplished accounting manager at a major corporation, someone respected for her sharp mind and leadership. But all of that faded into the background when her daughter's health became a mystery. Now, she worked part-time at an administrative job to keep herself busy while still prioritizing Katie's needs. Her faith had become her anchor. Early morning prayers before sunrise, church gatherings, and a community of believers who reassured her that God had a plan, even if she didn't understand it yet. Her husband, David Parker, was the rock of the family. At least that was what everyone believed. David was the head of research and development at a global pharmaceutical company called Leak Pharmaceuticals. He was an elite executive, a man who commanded both respect and envy. He had the kind of job that made people whisper in admiration, earning a 6-figure salary, leading groundbreaking research, and working on cutting-edge drug development projects that had the potential to change lives. He was also an exceptional father. He made time to take Katie to the park, to help her with her science projects, and to listen attentively to her every dream. At church, people admired him, his calm demeanor, his unwavering devotion to his family. To everyone else, the Parker family seemed perfect. But perfection is a fragile illusion. It was an ordinary evening. At least it started that way. Melissa was in the kitchen, chopping organic vegetables for dinner. She had always been mindful of what she fed her family, carefully selecting ingredients with minimal additives. Whole Foods had become her second home, and she and Katie had made a habit of stopping by the farmer's market every weekend to pick out fresh produce together. The house was peaceful, the scent of garlic and rosemary filling the air. Melissa could hear the faint scratching of Katie's pencil against paper as she worked on her homework at the dining table. Then, without warning, there was a thud. Melissa turned sharply, her heart dropping into her stomach. Katie was on the floor. Her notebook lay open beside her, pages crumpled from the impact. Pencils had rolled across the hardwood floor. "Katie," Melissa cried, rushing to her daughter's side. Katie's small body trembled, her face pale, drenched in cold sweat. Her breathing was shallow, and when Melissa touched her forehead, she flinched at the unnatural heat radiating from her daughter's skin. Panic gripped her chest like a vice. "Stay with me, sweetheart," Melissa whispered, trying to keep her voice steady. Her hands trembled as she reached for her phone, dialing emergency services with lightning speed. 911. "What's your emergency?" "It's my daughter. She collapsed. She's burning up. She's..." Her voice broke as she struggled to hold herself together. "She needs help." The operator's voice was calm, giving her instructions. "An ambulance is on the way. Try to keep her conscious." Melissa dropped the phone, cupping Katie's face in her hands. "Baby, can you hear me?" Katie's eyelids fluttered weakly. "Mommy." Her voice was barely a whisper. "I don't feel good." Melissa choked back tears. "I know, sweetheart. Just hold on. Help is coming." Her fingers clutched Katie's hand tightly as she heard the distant sound of sirens growing louder. The minutes stretched like hours, but finally, the front doorbell rang. The paramedics rushed in, their expressions immediately shifting into urgency. "She has a high fever," one of them assessed, checking Katie's vitals. "We need to transport her immediately." Melissa followed as they carefully lifted Katie onto the stretcher, her little fingers gripping onto her mother's hand. "I'm scared," Katie whispered. Melissa forced a smile despite the terror clawing at her chest. "It's okay, baby. I'm right here." The ambulance doors shut, and as they sped toward St. Mary's General Hospital, Melissa did the only thing she could. She prayed, "Lord, please, please protect my daughter." When they arrived at the hospital, Dr. Robert, Uncle Robbie Roberts, was already waiting in the emergency room. He had been their family doctor for years, a man with a warm smile and a reputation for being one of the best pediatric surgeons in the state. But today, his face was tight with worry as he examined Katie. "She has severe abdominal tenderness," he said grimly. "We need a CT scan right away." Melissa nodded, feeling her stomach twist into knots. At that moment, David arrived. He rushed into the hospital, out of breath, his tie loosened, his usually composed expression replaced by something raw. Fear. "Melissa." He grabbed her hands. "How is she?" Melissa barely had time to answer before the CT scan results came in. Dr. Roberts studied the screen, his brows furrowing deeply. Then his expression changed, from concern to alarm. "Prepare for emergency surgery immediately," he ordered. "We suspect acute peritonitis. It's a race against time." In the hallway leading to the operating room, Katie clung to Melissa's hand, her voice small. "Mom, will I still be able to be a doctor?" Melissa swallowed hard, forcing herself to smile despite the fear clawing at her throat. "Of course, sweetheart. You'll be a wonderful doctor." The doors to the operating room swung closed. Melissa stood frozen. She had no idea that her world was about to shatter. That tonight, she would learn a truth so horrifying, so unthinkable, that it would change their lives forever. And the man she had trusted most would be at the center of it all. A father's fear, a mother's nightmare. The fluorescent lights in the hospital corridor flickered slightly, casting a sterile, almost unnatural glow against the stark white walls. The beeping of monitors, the hushed murmurs of nurses, and the occasional distant cry of a patient all blended into an eerie hum that made the air feel thick with tension. Melissa sat hunched over in one of the uncomfortable waiting room chairs, her fingers gripping the armrests so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. The scent of antiseptic filled her nostrils, but she barely noticed it. Her mind was spinning, her heart hammering against her ribs as she stared at the closed double doors that led to the operating room. Inside, her daughter, her only child, was on an operating table, fighting for her life. Her thoughts were shattered when David's voice broke through the tense silence. "We need to move her to another hospital." Melissa turned sharply, her face etched with disbelief. "What?" David's usually composed demeanor was crumbling. His blue dress shirt, now slightly wrinkled, clung to his tense frame, and his tie hung loosely around his neck. His forehead glistened with sweat, and there was something in his eyes, something Melissa couldn't quite place. Fear, not just fear for Katie, fear for something else. "This hospital isn't the best option," David pressed. "We should transfer her to Leak Pharmaceuticals' affiliated medical center. They have more advanced equipment, better specialists." Melissa narrowed her eyes. "But St. Mary's is our hospital, David. Dr. Roberts knows Katie better than anyone. We don't have time to move her. She needs surgery now." David's jaw clenched. "Melissa, listen to me." "No, you listen to me." She shot up from her seat, her voice trembling with emotion. "Our daughter collapsed. She's burning up, she's in pain, and you're talking about transferring her like she's some business deal. What is wrong with you?" David opened his mouth, but before he could respond, the operating room doors burst open. A surgeon rushed out, his scrubs speckled with tiny droplets of blood. Melissa's heart stopped. "What happened?" she gasped, stepping forward. "Is she okay?" Dr. Roberts appeared behind the surgeon, his face pale, his usual gentle expression replaced with something grim. His hands were still gloved, stained red. "There's something inside your daughter," he said, his voice low. Melissa froze. "What? What do you mean?" Her breath came in short, shallow gasps. Dr. Roberts exhaled heavily. "We found a foreign object inside Katie's abdomen." For a moment, the words didn't register. Melissa stared at him, her mind struggling to process what he was saying. A foreign object. Inside her daughter. David took a step back, his expression completely unreadable. "What kind of object?" Melissa whispered, her voice barely audible. Dr. Roberts met her eyes, his own filled with concern and something else. Something darker. A microchip. The room fell silent. A suffocating, heavy silence. Melissa felt the world tilt beneath her feet. What?" Her voice cracked, her vision blurring at the edges. Dr. Roberts held up a small evidence bag. Inside it, bathed in the harsh fluorescent light, was a tiny metallic chip, no bigger than a grain of rice. It gleamed. Cold. Mechanical. Inhuman. Melissa's stomach lurched. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a medical condition. This was something else. Something sinister. Her own daughter had something implanted inside of her. Melissa turned to David, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "You knew." David's eyes darted toward the exit. His face had lost all color. He looked like a man cornered. "David." Melissa's voice shook with something between horror and rage. "What the hell is this?" David opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Dr. Roberts stepped forward, his voice low, controlled. "We need to get the hospital ethics committee involved. And the police." At that, David snapped. "No." His voice was sharp, almost panicked. "There's no need for the police." Melissa felt her stomach drop. The David she knew, the devoted husband, the loving father, was gone. The man standing before her was a stranger. And deep down she knew. He was involved, unraveling the lie. Melissa sat in the dimly lit hospital chapel, her hands clasped together so tightly that her nails dug into her palms. She had spent the past hour in a haze, numb, replaying the last 10 years of her life in her mind. Searching, desperately searching, for signs. Had she missed something? Had she been blind to the truth? Why would her own husband implant something inside their daughter? What kind of father does that? She thought about the long nights David spent at the office, the classified research he could never talk about, the vague answers he gave her when she asked about his work. And now this, a microchip inside Katie. The sound of footsteps echoed against the marble floor. Melissa didn't look up. "Melissa," a quiet voice said. It was Dr. Roberts. She exhaled shakily. Did she make it through the surgery? Yes, Dr. Roberts said. Katie is stable. But, he hesitated. Melissa, this chip, it wasn't just carelessly implanted. It was put there deliberately. A sick, twisting feeling curled in her gut. What do you mean? She asked, barely able to get the words out. Dr. Roberts sat beside her, lowering his voice. This isn't standard technology. It's sophisticated. The kind of thing only a high-level research lab could produce. Melissa's fingers clenched against the wooden pew. A high-level research lab. Like Leak Pharmaceuticals. Like David's company. A chill ran down her spine. You're telling me my husband, my own daughter's father, was experimenting on her? Dr. Roberts hesitated before nodding. It's possible. Melissa shot up from the pew, her chest tightening. No, she said, shaking her head violently. No, he wouldn't. He couldn't. He loves her. I know this is hard to process, Dr. Roberts said gently. But Melissa, we have to consider the possibility that David knew about this. She squeezed her eyes shut, feeling the weight of everything crashing down on her. Her husband. The man she had trusted with her life. The man Katie adored. Had betrayed them. A sharp knock on the chapel door made them both turn. A detective stepped inside, his badge gleaming under the soft golden light. Mrs. Parker, he said, his voice serious. We need to talk. Melissa's hand shook. She wasn't ready for this. She wasn't ready to hear the truth. Because deep in her soul, she already knew. Her perfect life had been a lie. And the man she had trusted most was about to destroy everything. The fall and the rise. The courtroom was silent, suffocating under the weight of what was unfolding. Melissa sat in the front row, her hands trembling in her lap, her nails digging into the skin of her palm. Around her, reporters clutched their notepads, lawyers whispered behind their hands, and the judge sat high on the bench, eyes sharp and unwavering. Across the room, at the defendant's table, sat David Parker. Her husband, her daughter's father. His once proud posture had crumbled. His expensive suit, one that once symbolized his power, his status, his authority, now hung loosely on his frame, as though the weight of his sins had shrunk him. The man who once commanded respect was now a shell of himself. The prosecutor stepped forward, his voice steady, deliberate. The defendant, David Parker, subjected at least 6 children, including his own daughter, to illegal human experimentation, he said. His actions were not only a violation of medical ethics, but of basic human decency. A ripple of unease spread through the courtroom. Melissa swallowed back the nausea rising in her throat. The prosecutor clicked a remote, and a large screen behind him flickered to life. A series of photographs filled the screen. Melissa's heart stopped. The images were of children. Children just like Katie. Their small bodies, frail and weak, their stomachs scarred from surgeries they never consented to. Their eyes, hollow and distant, evidence of what had been done to them. Sobs broke out in the courtroom. Melissa's stomach twisted painfully. These were children whose parents had trusted the medical system. Children who should have been safe. And yet David had turned them into experiments. He had turned Katie into an experiment. The confession. David's voice shook when he finally spoke. His hands, once steady and confident, now trembled. I thought I was doing the right thing, he whispered. The room fell into a suffocating silence. Melissa's nails dug deeper into her skin. My research was everything, he continued. Leak Pharmaceuticals was about to cut funding for a major drug project. We needed results, human trial data. We were so close to something revolutionary, but without human trials, it would all be shut down. His voice cracked. Melissa felt something inside her break. I didn't mean to hurt her, David continued, his voice barely above a whisper. His eyes found hers, pleading, desperate. Melissa, you have to believe me. I never meant to hurt Katie. I thought. But his voice failed him. Because there was no justification. Melissa had no words. What do you say to the man who was supposed to protect your child, only to find out he was the reason she suffered? What do you say to a father who sacrificed his own daughter for a scientific breakthrough? Melissa's fingers tightened around the silver cross pendant hanging from her neck. She had once trusted this man with everything. Now he was just a stranger. A man whose choices had left scars on their daughter, scars both seen and unseen. The judge's gavel struck the wood. The court finds David Parker guilty of multiple counts of medical malpractice, illegal human experimentation, and child endangerment, she announced. Sentencing to follow. A sharp sob echoed from the back of the room. Melissa turned. It was David's mother. Tears streamed down the older woman's face as she clutched a tissue in her trembling hands. Melissa closed her eyes. This wasn't just the end of David. This was the end of everything they had built together. And yet, as she sat there, surrounded by the whispers, the reporters, the heavy weight of the truth, she knew this wasn't just her pain. This was about all the parents whose children had been victims. This was about justice. This was about ensuring this never happened again. Rebuilding the ruins. 6 months later. The sun was bright, warmer than it had been in a long time. Melissa stood outside St. Mary's Hospital, watching as Katie ran ahead, her curls bouncing, her laughter light and free. She was healing. The scars on her stomach were still there, but the pain had faded. The fear had faded. Melissa had taken time away from everything, her job, the media, the nightmare of the trial, to focus on her daughter, to help her heal, to help herself heal. Katie had questions. She had asked why her father wasn't coming home. She had asked why he did what he did. And Melissa had told the truth. Not all of it, not at once, but enough. Enough for Katie to understand. Enough for her to move forward. As they walked toward the hospital doors, Katie turned, a bright smile on her face. "Mommy," she said, her voice strong, no longer weak. "I'm still gonna be a doctor." Melissa's chest tightened. Her throat burned. Tears welled in her eyes, but this time, they weren't tears of pain. She knelt, brushing a strand of hair from Katie's face. "I know you will, sweetheart," she whispered. "And you're going to be the best." Katie grinned, her eyes filled with certainty. Melissa took a deep breath. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning. For Katie. For her. For every child who had suffered. The scars of the past would always be there. But so would the strength to rise from them. And for the first time in a long time, Melissa believed in the future again. This concludes the story. Thank you for watching until the end. I hope you found it enjoyable. If you did, please consider liking the video and sharing it with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and activate the notification bell for more captivating stories. Have a great day.